All right, I'm going to start then, guys. Okay.
Cool.
So this year has been a really exciting year for public sector technology. At least I think so, especially with the production of the Blueprint for Modern Digital Government. And that really lays out a roadmap for where the government wants to do with public sector technology. And one of the big priorities in that is about elevating leadership and investing in talent. And I think that's really incredible. And we're here today with two wonderful panelists to really dig into that a little bit more and to explore that. And I just want to give one quote from the Blueprint that I think is really striking. It says, "Change won't happen without the right people, with the right expertise, working at the right levels, in multidisciplinary teams. We need greater technological literacy at the top of public sector organizations to ensure that digital is not an add-on, but a core skill set across the public sector." So I think we're gonna dig into that a little bit more with our panelists today. So really pleased to welcome Karl Hoods, CBE, congratulations, and the CDIO for DSNES and DSIT. And we also have Oliver Hester, who's the head of public sector at FDM Group, and also a member of techUK's Skills and Diversity Council. So welcome both.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're gonna just jump right in and really, in thinking about public sector digital skills, it's a challenge that's not really new. It's not, I mean, you know, the Blueprint is focusing on it, but it's been around for a while. Why can't we crack it? Like, what is it that's stopping us from really getting our hands around this challenge?
So I think in some ways, it's not just the public sector that has the part of the challenge. Yeah, I'm a non-exec in a number of different organisations, and I'm pretty much the lone digital voice in a room full of accountants, which always kind of makes me think about, you know, technology plays such an important role in any organisation. Why aren't there more digital folk on that kind of board level? So I think it's a similar sort of pattern that we see in the public sector to some degree, although strides are being made. So I think it's a multi-level issue that we've got. Everything from early talent through to kind of senior talent is something that we're trying to tackle with. And we've all seen the stats about the kind of talent pipeline and the number of people and vacancies that we need. So I think we just got to try and tackle it in multiple levels. There isn't a one-size-fits-all type approach to this. So I think we're doing good things inside the organisation that we're in. There's always more that we can do, but I think it's, you know, partnering with people like Ollie and FDM, which kind of help us on that journey as well to think about what we can do next.
Amazing. Anything else you think, Ollie?
Yeah, I do. I think Carl's absolutely right in reinforcing that message that there's a UK-wide digital skills gap, and that applies both to the public and private sector. And in my seat with FDM, we're engaging with 200 plus clients that will come to us with similar challenges around attracting and retaining digital talent. I think in the context of the public sector, there's probably further limitations in terms of potentially around salaries and what they compare to in terms of the private sector, although there have been great strides in terms of developing digital data and technology teams and allowances from a payment perspective to help support that. So yes, there are gaps, but there's strides that are being made. And I think it's about, as Karl was saying, that sort of multi-layered approach to bringing in different levels of talent and finding ways to pipeline at that earlier age with a longer term view as well.
Yeah.
I think in tackling that, you know, that issue and perception of salaries, which is real to a degree, but I think I had the same challenge when I worked in the not-for-profit sector. And I think there it's as much about the kind of environment that you'll be working in and then the outcomes that you'll be achieving in the cause. And I think we're finding some real success in both that. Look, we're dealing with cutting-edge technology, emerging technologies, and we've got a great story to tell in terms of the organisations that we support, because we support multiple. That if you're interested in energy and climate change, then well, great. We've got a whole host of projects that you can be involved in. Also, if you're interested in science, innovation, and technology, we've got, you know, loads of activity in that sort of space. So there's something about the storytelling as an attraction mechanism, and then from a retention piece, we've invested quite heavily in terms of our learning and development. We've got our own HR team in our digital function, which is solely focused on that culture. Embedding that culture of inquisitiveness and building that into our own team, as well as infusing that into the rest of the organisation. And I think there is something there that we can do more of across government. If we look at the kind of digital skills at a senior level and in the pipeline as you progress, at the moment we've got this slight tension, it feels, between established schemes that exist for civil servants to go on, and then we have digital as an adjunct.
Right.
So if you're faced with a decision about, do I go on this course or do I invest in going in another, you're likely to go with the ones that have been tried and established civil service type courses,
Right.
like FLS and SLS and MPLA and all those others that exist. So for me, why can't we add more of the digital skills into those existing programs, so we're not creating a barrier for entry for people, and it just becomes part and parcel of everybody's day-to-day job.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think one of the things that you said really drives home the point that salary is just one aspect of pay, right?
Yeah.
of sort of what you get from your job. And I think when we think about like that sort of attracting and retaining talent piece, what is it, how do we draw more out of that aspect to really attract and retain the right people?
So they say it's part of the storytelling. So that starts with our job descriptions and our adverts, and then just how we engage with people through the process. So, we tend to have open days, albeit virtual. So it's a chance for prospective candidates to kind of meet the team that they might be working with, ask questions, answer that in a kind of group setting, rather than necessarily get worried about, how can I ask all these questions during interview, just so that we can make it easily accessible. And then it's about the work that we're doing, examples of projects that we're engaged with, but also the opportunities for learning and development, the sorts of technologies that we provide. And for us, I think we've got an even better story in that we're providing technology services to multiple departments. At recent count, we've got 13 organisations relying on us for their technology, with more to come. So again, that's another opportunity for them to gain experience on a more broader level. So I think it's about trying to figure out what it is that will be attractive to different people at different stages of their career, and then how do we match what we're offering with that sort of cohort or that kind of demographic. But it's a constant evolution, which is why we've got, we've made the investment in the team internally to kind of help us through that journey.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that sentiment. I've deployed 3,000 people into the public sector over the last 10 years into digital careers, and a huge part of the work that I've done is, and with many others, is to tell the story about the purpose behind some of the work that's going on in the public sector. During the pandemic, for example, talking to people about the opportunity to be involved in test and trace from a digital perspective is a fantastic opportunity for people that attach a lot through their work and in the opportunity to support other people. And I think now more than ever, there's a generation at a younger level that are more interested in that opportunity. And places like working with Karl and his teams from a sustainability perspective is really interesting. So, echo a lot of that sentiment, I think.
What about that retention piece, though? I mean, in terms of like, sometimes it's getting them in the door, but then how do you keep them? How do you keep them there?
So again, investment in them as individuals, as well as what we're doing. So, we've had great success with placement students that are now coming back in the cyber world. So, in my mind, they're really hard to recruit sort of skills and roles. And our expectation was, if we can get some people in on a placement year, alongside apprenticeships and other schemes that we've got, that would be a good way of them finding out more about careers in the civil service. But having known early talent career people in the cyber world, invariably they're snapped up by the city at kind of salaries that we just cannot compete with. But both of them have wanted to come back. Amazing. And I think that's because they can see the breadth of the work that we're doing, plus the potential for them to grow in the role. And I think that's what we should be doing as CIOs, is investing in people. I would say part of my job is to make sure people can go on and do the next thing that they want to do. Yeah. I'd prefer that if it was inside our organisation, but you've got to be realistic. People will want to progress their career. If we don't have the kind of career pathway there, well, then they're going to move on. So we need to do our job in kind of, upskilling people at all levels. So again, retention, we invest in people. We've got a great learning and development offer. We access online learning tools like Pluralsight and others, but we also leverage the relationships with our strategic suppliers. So, we're looking at becoming effectively partners. We just signed a partnership deal with ServiceNow as an example,
Okay.
and that's so that we can get the same sort of level of accreditation as a private sector organisation. So when people look at us, they can say, great, they've got partnership status, and we're exploring that with our other strategic suppliers as well. So that unlocks the kind of roadmap. It gives us early access to product. It gives us access to training materials that we might not otherwise get. It's all those sorts of things that we're looking to develop so that, again, people can tap into that rather than think, have I got to justify why I need to go on this training course because we only get a budget of X per year. We've got all of that material freely available to us.
Is that just you, or is this like across public sector? Are you doing something special?
We always like to think we're doing something different. I'm not aware of anybody else having kind of approached the partnership kind of process. And certainly our strategic suppliers, when we talk to them, we're the first that are doing that in UK public sector. It happens in the States sometimes. I think we're large American tech companies, but very rarely in Europe. I mean, many other organisations across public sector have invested in learning platforms, that kind of stuff. But I think we're starting to see ourselves more of an internal managed service provider. So we're trying to put ourselves on that footing because we are providing services to multiple organisations. So in that way, we are different, I think, and we're always striving to do something differently.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the thing that we always have to talk about now in any sort of setting like this, and that's AI, right? So AI is kind of, I was thinking today, it's sort of like it's in everything and also around everything at the same time, in terms of like when you talk about AI in recruitment and that people are using AI in applications and things, as well as you have to recruit for AI skills. So that's why it's kind of, you really can't really escape it. It's everywhere you go. How can we ensure that public sector professionals are equipped with the sort of skills that they need to manage AI solutions?
So similar themes, I suppose. We've got technologies we should be aware of. At one level, there are groups of people that, don't need to know the nth degree of detail. I was asked a similar question the other week on a panel about, do senior people need to understand technology to what degree? It's like they don't need to code in Python and write hello world, but I think at one level, understanding the kind of capability and what the art of the possible is definitely required. And then as you move through different areas, then a deeper understanding is required. So for us, it's about how do we tackle that audience? What are we doing for training and awareness across all of those different levels? And that's, we've got workshops planned and kind of ongoing to kind of bring to life, this is what AI might mean in policy making, or this is how AI might be used in grant management and services, that kind of stuff. So the real thing that we try to kind of push is to focus on the problem statement and the outcome you're trying to achieve. And then we'll match the technology to it, because I think we've all seen everywhere, which, kind of, there's a technology, AI, blockchain, metaverse, whatever, all in the pursuit of a problem. Well, let's figure out, let's figure out what we're trying to achieve first, and then we'll do the matching between AI. And it's like, even what do we mean by AI? And somebody remarked the other month of, we're talking about machine learning, and they class that as legacy AI. It's kind of like, well, okay, we've got to that stage already where the Gen AI is the thing that we're all focused on. But again, there's a wealth of things that we're already using. So I think it's about, bringing that to life, getting people to understand what the art of the possible is. And then for us, it's also about how do we utilize the tools we've already invested in. And I think that's what we're focusing on at the moment. We've got some great platforms that we use to service our demand. We have to maximize the use of that. And they're all having AI built into them and infused. So I think that's, how do we really leverage that before we then start going on to think about other solutions? And there may well be other things that we need to do outside of those core platforms. But I think first and foremost, when we're looking at what we're trying to deliver, a lot can be achieved with the technology we've already got.
Makes sense. I wonder, I always sort of go back and forth in my mind about, like, does the technology need to be easier, or do we need to be more skilled in using the technology? Because I mean, there will be roles where you have to, like, where you're actually actively using the technology and building it and programming and all of that. But there will be need for digital skills that aren't that kind of skills, if you know what I mean. And I think the government does this sort of one big thing program every year where they sort of get everyone skilled up on a certain aspect of digital. And does that does that kind of thing need to be easier? Or do people need to upskill themselves? Am I making any sense whatsoever?
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of both, right? So
Right.
if we look at some of the things that we're developing, we're very much taking a product mindset to the things that we're delivering, right? So if we look at something we might want to do around grants and schemes, what we're trying to do is build a product based on a platform that we can consume, like Salesforce or Dynamics or whatever it may be. So we're trying to put that in place and then think about the solution, the problems that we're trying to solve. How do we turn those into components that are repeatable? Which we've got some great success on, reuse of 60 to 80% of the components that we've built in some areas. The next level is, well, how do we then give that power and capability to people outside of the digital team, which is where the kind of low code, no code kind of stuff comes in a controlled manner. So it's not like the Wild West and we've got people off building business critical apps without our knowledge. So there's that angle to it. And then I think there's just the general, again, back to skills. What is it that people can be inquisitive about?
Right.
How can we provide them with some tooling where they can access and use? Like, we're heavy users of Microsoft Office 365. The amount of applications that exist under Teams that can do workflow, that can do polls, that can do all these different things.
Yeah.
We're doing more in terms of making people aware that they exist and that they
Right.
can use them. And if they can service or think about their requirement by using those tools before they then kind of engage with us into a bigger project, well, then that's great because we're kind of doing the discovery by actively using something.
Yeah.
It's interesting because inside of FDM we'll potentially train up to thousands of people across different technical platforms, and I think there's always sort of the baseline of what every consultant we would expect to have as a baseline of different levels of understanding around tech, and from an AI perspective there's clearly just a standard user, and then there's the specialization of understanding how to use that particular tool across a particular discipline. So a software developer is going to be using AI in a completely different way to perhaps a project manager, and I think it comes back to that sort of understanding of how you can almost put people into pockets of users and the way in which they should be potentially using that technology, and setting out what that as is looks like today in terms of the opportunity within the existing estate that you have from a technology perspective, and then where you can look to be in the future and plotting out what you want that to look like. But probably with things like AI and other things, considering important things like ethics and data security and all that sort of stuff as well. So it's not an easy task. I don't envy you.
No, I think there's the technical skills which we can do at varying degrees. Although increasingly, that's becoming more important to me is mindset and attitude. So we're very much exploring and thinking about how do we take the product development mindset and take that into other areas of the organization, as well as systems thinking, because we're part of a broader system. So we're always encouraging our teams to think about, if we're delivering a project for a particular policy area, we'll think about how that might then interact with other areas of the organization or the other organizations that we're delivering services to. So we have a broader view. That way we can start to build a kind of more extensible, richer set of products that we're then using. So for us, it's definitely as much about the technical skills as it is about the kind of mindset. How do we solve problems in a different way? What's our approach to innovation? Can we really test and learn rapidly? It's all that kind of stuff that we've talked about for ages that we're starting to implement more and more of.
Yeah. I was at a conference a couple of months ago, and it seems like the things are turning away from. Before it used to be human in the loop. Everyone's talking about human in the loop, but now it seems everyone's talking about human-centered AI. So it's sort of like putting the people and the users at the heart of what it is, and it's the technology meant to service people and not people service the technology. So it seems like that is sort of the new trend of how people are thinking about engaging with technology. And it feels very refreshing, actually, to be actually like, I'm not meant to serve the AI, but AI is meant to serve me. And
I think that goes back to that in some ways, that technology in search of a problem,
Yes.
right? Which is like we're in a rush to deploy technology
Yeah.
because it's the next big thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's in the Gartner hype cycle. We've not reached the trough of despair yet. So let's try and do something with it, which I think is like where we've got to hold ourselves true,
Yeah.
is to think about what is it we're trying to actually
Absolutely.
solve here,
Absolutely.
which is the important thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like I have this AI hammer now. Where's the nail? Everything is AI nail now. I think we have to also think about the security aspect of it, and cybersecurity is paramount in the digital age. How can we balance the need for innovation with critical imperative to protect sensitive data and maintain public trust? Especially when we're talking about AI. So what do you think, AI and security?
Well, in my mind, one of the key areas, and we've kind of been speaking about this a lot, is around the training and education side, making people aware of how to mitigate some of the bias elements that can lend towards it, and particularly in a public sector setting. Obviously different departments are going to have different ways in which they really need to be considering data security. I can't imagine that the MOD using AI is going to be a good thing if certain information is shared with people
Right.
that it shouldn't be. So and ways to do that, I'm sure there's a number of different strategies that have been applied as various technology has come through, but probably comes back again to thinking about, well, what is each user group, how do we want them to be using this new technology, and then how are we ensuring that we're almost kite sealing, approving that group of people to use it. And I always think with these things, well, it's like start small, pilot things,
Yeah.
make sure you're doing it in the right way at that stage, and then scale it, lessons learned, take a bit of an agile approach. So yeah, that's just some of my first thoughts on that.
Yeah. What, do we think there's sufficient public trust in AI, or are people still really skeptical and really, distrusting of AI?
I think with all things trust, a lot of it's around transparency. I think if there's an opportunity for AI models to be developed and then for there to be transparency on what that looks like with people, I think that will help to encourage a position where people are more trusting of that. Of course, again, in the public sector setting, I suspect there's going to be challenges in terms of how transparent you might potentially be able to be. But typically, I'd suggest that people have seen that with other technology advancements, there's been a level of trust around that, and that's typically, end result, better digital services for the people. The passport turnaround is very quick, for example, and I don't think people are concerned around that as much, although I appreciate, slightly different parallel.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think there's this tension between wanting things to be really good and really fast and really efficient, and then also trusting that the data is being handled properly. And so there's that sort of tension. How do you handle things like security and data governance in your...
So there's standards, policies, we've got governance forums, mechanisms that kind of do all of that. It's built in you've got guardrails across all of the infrastructure and applications and services that we kind of manage. And I think it's about setting those and monitoring them. I think use of AI in cyber, your earlier question there is we use that both in the tooling for threat detection and other activities, because there's such a volume and we can never have enough people trying to keep on top of that, versus securing the AI applications that we need to in workloads to make sure that data is only staying within our kind of ring-fenced organisation, as it were, being really clear on how people should be using Copilot, ChatGPT, etc., or not, and all that. I think there's some interesting tooling coming out at the moment, for example, to look at prompt inspection, so that I guess the big challenge for all organisations is how do we really know what prompts people are typing into publicly available generative AI solutions. So the more insight we can get and start to layer governance across the top of that, then that's the key thing. So it comes back to the standard governance principles. How do we then hold the standards to account and make sure people know what they should be doing, and how do we make ourselves aware when something does go wrong? So that's all you can do in this sort of space at the
Yeah,
moment. I think
yeah.
advances that quick, and I chatted to somebody recently that said, they weren't too bothered about AI adversaries versus AI because there was so much work to do just basically from a cyber perspective that most organisations, public and private, have got a long way to go to get themselves up to speed without worrying about necessarily how they need to start building more AI into their kind of defences, because the AI will eventually face off to AI. And there'll be this weird, kind of dystopian kind of view of robots battling each other. But, maybe there's some truth in that. I don't know.
Yeah, no. I think there's also this, there's a different appetite among different people for their sort of risk and their, how much they're ready to embrace AI or not. My cousin said, I was able to generate 100 different photos of myself for like headshots that I can put all over. And I thought to myself, why would you want to do that? Like, that sounds a little bit risky to me, but he was absolutely fine with it. And, I guess you have your innovation enthusiasts and those people, and then you have your people that are naturally a bit more skeptical and reserved. And I suppose it's just reassuring everybody that, having that right level of trust that you're going fast enough for the enthusiasts, but not too fast for those that are completely skeptical and are like, what are you doing? This is my actual face that you're just like generating photos of, So, yeah.
I had a discussion on this at one of the school boards that I'm on about, how do we know when students are using AI? Do we let them use AI in that kind of stuff? And I think, again, there's some some principles there around acceptable use, referencing your sources, that kind of stuff. I guess if there's a worry that I have, it's, are people blindly going to a ChatGPT, or students go into that and accepting the information they get back as fact? And we all know, the kind of hallucination problem and others, and that will be solved over time. But I think, we need to build in that kind of level of inquisitive, like, is this actually like, how do I know this is real and not just an amalgamation of 8 different things into one?
Don't lose the critical thinking.
And equally, there are tools. I know when my son was at university, there's plagiarism tools where they submit their work and it gives them a kind of 70% of this is similar to somebody else's one, which he actually did get pulled up on. But the interesting fact there, well, the thing there for me is, like, doing law, there was a case study that they needed to do. There was one like reference case for it. It was a particular type of law, so most of the class had a similar sort of answer. It goes through the plagiarism tracker and says your answer is very similar to somebody else's. Come in and have a conversation, and then when you work through it all, it's like, oh, well, it will be the same because like the pool of information is extremely limited. So I think whilst there are tools that kind of help highlight that, and we might highlight that in recruitment, for example, where we've had some very similar kind of personal statements come through, etc. Is like, again, that's the answer that you might get out of that might not be the fact. So you need to be able to look at that and say, actually, yes, it might be similar because there are other factors that made it so. It isn't just a straight, we believe the answer out of that. So I think this is where the kind of change in people's roles might come. It's less about replacing whole jobs, but more about changing them and enhancing them and accelerating certain parts, which may mean we need to go back to thinking about other skills that we need.
Right. Interesting. I think if we look at sort of the role of recruitment, and it's sort of, you can do lots of things through recruitment, and it's sort of, I think of it sort of like procurement. You're buying the one thing, but you're also doing a lot more than just buying the one thing. And with recruitment, you can do much more than just hire a person. You can look at sort of, how do I make a more diverse workforce through my recruitment policies? How do I help disadvantaged communities through my recruitment? What sort of, how can we, I have this example here of digital hubs. So digital hubs are being proposed to foster local opportunities. How can hubs be designed to effectively support people outside of London and create sustainable, thriving tech ecosystems in regional areas?
So if we sort of consider how FDM operates and the experience that I've had here, we've been in a position where we've set up a recruitment function that looks to bring in talent from across the UK. And we spend a lot of effort around trying to build a brand around the fact that we are inclusive by nature and support diversity. And And by doing that, we're able to be in a position where we start to bring people through into our business from lots of different types of backgrounds, whether that be ex-services professionals, so people from the ex-forces looking to transition into a career in Civvy Street, as they would call it, looking at returners to work, so people who have left the industry to raise a young family, look after a sick relative, something of that nature, and people that come from predominantly a lower social economic status as well tend to apply for an FDM opportunity. Perhaps they don't have the social capital to enable them to have the connections into the customers that we work with, or potentially be in a position where they can afford to upskill in a particular area of technology. And where we've seen what we've been able to do is partner with some of these hubs with that talent, where I think they are currently quite well attuned to the idea of supporting that type of person coming into their organisation. I think there's definitely been an innovation in terms of the way that they land and work with those types of people as well. Referring back to some of the things that Karl was talking about, there's a greater employee value proposition for them in terms of the online training that's available, the mindset of the people that are around them that are really there to try and support them with their development in a way that is probably unique in comparison to, say, the private sector. So there's a real opportunity there to continue that throughput. I guess the challenge is the scalability of it versus the challenge of what needs to be delivered, and making sure there's a balance of the right levels of capability to get the job done, but also fostering, an inclusive talent development environment, if you like.
Yeah, we recruit in multiple locations, so we've got presence in Birmingham, Manchester, Cardiff, Glasgow, all over. So our default is to advertise outside of London first, but then recognising that we're in a fairly competitive market, that we might add London back in. But we're looking at how do we build communities in those different locations, because it would be pretty soul destroying if you were the lone kind of software engineer in a location where you didn't have any team members and you were just spending all of your time on Teams. That doesn't kind of build that. We're encouraging people to come together, and we've tried all the other schemes, and we use the kind of stuff that Ollie's mentioned there. I think for me there is something more that can be done, and I spend a lot of time in education outside of work, and for me we need a longitudinal kind of approach to this. And I think where we're trying to engage as a group of schools with technology providers, it seems that it's very much on a kind of ad hoc basis, i.e. organisation X might give 2 days a year for volunteering, and they'll go into a school and give a speech. But if you're in an inner city school and you've got no role models and you've got no access to technology careers or understanding of it, it could be quite difficult to access. And I think that's where we're trying to have a call to arms for people, is like, how do tech companies think about doing something differently in that space? And most tech companies have got a presence in different areas of the country. So what can you do to engage with schools on a local basis, on a long-term initiative, rather than me turn up at a school and give a talk on careers in technology in different sectors? Might be interesting for that 1 hour that I'm there, but what happens the week after and the month after? So I think that's where we need sustained engagement if we're really going to encourage people to think about careers in technology. Because in schools it's pretty much computer science or business computing, right? We don't talk necessarily about the breadth of careers in testing, user interface design. There's all sorts of different career paths that you need to think of. So we have to do that early, in my mind, because it's no good worrying about the challenge when you get to post A level or into apprenticeship like discussions, because by that time it's too late for them to start thinking about those kind of careers. So I think if we can do more locally across the tech sector, I think that's what we should be doing over a long-term investment basis, rather than you can access our free licenses, or you can access our free training, or we'll come in and paint your fence because that's our one day that we've got, sort of thing. How do we make it more meaningful?
Absolutely.
I think that greater connection between industry and public sector is really important. And so one of the notes that rings really true is that I think from an early education and higher education perspective, the level of the training is in a position where it's probably less practical than it needs to be to get people into the right space, and also challenges in terms of how it specialises. As Karl says, hundreds of different, maybe potentially thousands of different types of jobs that sit across industry. Typically, I see people in a very broad brush of education rather than getting that exposure to say if they're going to be a software developer coding in something like Python. I think there's probably been more advancements from a perspective of getting people in software engineering, but if you were to talk to people about, you know, some of the stuff that goes in user-centered design from a working in accessibility, it's probably less so. So I think it's how can you almost fine-tune and get people more specialised at an earlier age and get them more exposed to things. And as Karl probably alludes to, and it's right, is that there needs to be a closer collaboration between industry and government to kind of facilitate that.
Yeah, I think it is probably that exposure piece as well, because it's kind of, you don't know what you don't know, right? And if you've never heard of, you know, what is user-centered design? I have no idea what that is. Then you wouldn't it wouldn't be your natural default to think, yeah, I think I'd be good at that. So it's about how do we expose children to the possibilities of working in the tech sector. Yeah, there's a lot more to be done, isn't there?
Yeah. Exactly. And then when you get through to university, as Ollie started to talk about there, for me, one thing we're trying to do at one of the universities I'm on the board of is to think about micro-credentials.
All right.
So, you know, you do your degree course, which, you know, may, because of the cycle of things, might not be as up-to-date as you might want it to be. But if we can then start to offer, you know, qualifications with Microsoft, with Salesforce, with ServiceNow, with whomever, is provide those back, well, then you'll graduate with a degree, plus you could be a Microsoft certified engineer or the equivalent of.
Right.
So that way you're immediately, hopefully, more employable.
Yes.
And that gives you that other advantage, but gives you the kind of practical skills that you might not get in the breadth across the degrees. So that, again, that happens in other countries, happens less so, I think, in the UK. But we're kind of thinking about how do we partner with the technology providers to provide that, and I think that'll be a real valuable thing. And that doesn't have to be just across the computing type courses.
Right.
You can make those accessible to a whole range. So then, again, you're infusing digital skills into a range of different courses rather than saying that's another additional thing that you need to do.
Yeah. And digital skills is sort of, it isn't just needed for those like software developer roles, right? It is sort of needed across the breadth of an organization at some level. So getting those kinds of trainings sounds really good. I think this has been a really insightful discussion today. As we start to draw things to a close, if you had sort of one piece of advice for those listening, or one sort of big takeaway for public sector, what would it be? Ollie?
I'd say doing fantastic effort to, and in my experience over the last 10 years in building digital skills, but there's more that can be done, and I think there's a great opportunity with new technology, potential of AI, to find ways to potentially use that opportunity to develop pipelines of talent around people from more underrepresented backgrounds and to provide them with a really cracking opportunity. So keep going and let's see if we can do a bit more with that as well.
Yeah, amazing. Karl?
It's always difficult with just one thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But look, I think feels like we've got a real moment in time where there's a renewed focus on digital and the art of the possible and the opportunities that opens up. So we've got to embrace that and take it. For me, the one big learning that we've kind of experienced over the last year or so is the fact that we can't solve all these problems on our own. So collaboration is key. So find the people that are doing interesting things, whether that's across the sector, outside the sector, collaborate and work with others to try and solve the problem and learn from them.
For me, I think the big takeaway from the discussion today is that public sector technology is a really exciting area to work in, and there's lots to offer people. Honestly, when Karl was talking in the beginning, I was like, maybe I should be working in Karl's team. Like, you were really selling it.
We got vacancies.
So,
come join us.
But I think there's a really great opportunity for people that are really curious and inquisitive and want to feel that the work that they're doing really has a lot of value for society. I think there's exciting opportunity, and especially in an environment where technology is constantly changing and there's always something new, to combine that with delivering something for the wider social good. It feels like an exciting time. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really great discussion, and let's do it again. Why not?
Thank you.
Thanks so much.